call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Welcome, everyone. Are there any announcements, acknowledgements, or recognitions? Announcements, acknowledgements, or recognitions? I would like to just say that the South Shore exhibition kicked off yesterday, a day earlier than normal for a lot of their things, and hopefully everyone has the opportunity to take in some of the activities, everything from 4-H to ox and horse pulls to musical entertainment and the Midway. So there's lots for everyone. So, is there anyone here for public input? Anyone here for public input? Just making sure there's only one before I say. I do see. If you would come forward to the mic, please. There's one person, so you are allocated 15 minutes. If you would come to the mic over here. And if you would state your name and the community that you're from.
Nancy Vino, Wenzel Lake.
Okay. And you can go ahead then.
Okay. I'm here to speak on the records management and destruction policy. It is not okay to change the policy from a 10-year retention and CAO to review at any time to the records management's discretion. As I listened to the minutes of the last council meeting, I heard April speak about many types of records. And one example was historical records in relation to the cemetery. That is only one example of the importance of records. And to all of a sudden make a change, this policy has been in place since 1999. That's 25 years. This policy has not been reviewed and updated. It seems a bit strange that all of a sudden the policy is moving that in 1 week it's going to be changed to the discretion of one person to look after all of these records. So I question the decision of council today. When you vote on this, know that voters are listening. The timeliness of the decision is what I ask. Many subjects are reviewed, weeks, or recommendations brought back, but this is a motion being brought forward that one records manager can dump records, and there could be many details that will be dismissed. So I'm asking all of you to think about why this decision is being made and if it's the right decision for everyone in the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope that you will stay for the presentation. Is there anyone else here for public input? Hearing none. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, I would ask for someone to move the approval of the agenda as circulated. Moved by Councillor Moore, seconded by Deputy Mayor Oikel. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. We'll move down to the approval of the minutes of June 25th, 2024. Would someone moved by Councillor Vino, seconded by Councillor Haysom. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Approval of the minutes of July 9th, 2024. Would someone moved by Councillor Hubley, seconded by Councillor Wynot. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Any business arising from the minutes? Hearing none. There are no tenders. We will go down to 11.2.1 to start with, proposed fire tax rates for 2024, 2025. And we have our fire services coordinator with us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, so this is the proposed rates that fire departments had put forward this year for their tax rates that they, for their budgets to operate and do what they need to do. So you have the paper before you there. There were 5 increases this year and 1 decrease.
Okay, I would ask if Councillor Wynot would be prepared to move the motion.
To Her Honor Mayor Bolivar Getson, members of council, I move that municipal council approve the fire tax rates per $100 of assessment for the fiscal year ending March 31, 2025, as presented, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor Wynot, seconded by Councillor DeLong.
Did he say $1 or 100?
For 100.
Okay, I'm just that.
For
from
for
over-
clarification, yes, that was definitely 100. I'm just yes. Any discussion on the motion? Again, fire departments hold their annual meetings, and this is a recommendation that comes back from them to the municipality, and then once we have all those back, it goes on an agenda. I have Deputy Mayor Oikle.
I just want to say that I believe these rates were presented to each of their residents at their
Yes.
meetings, and they were approved at the meeting. So the residents of the areas approved these rates.
Yeah, that is
At
correct,
their
yes.
meeting, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.
At the annual ratepayers
Yeah.
meeting.
The only exceptions would be the commissions that set their own rates under legislation, so they have a meeting to say what the rates are, but those would be the only exceptions. Everybody else would have a meeting where they vote.
Councillor DeLong. Oh, did someone else have their hand up? Oh, okay. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. We will go to 10.1.2, Comfort Center Grant Award, Lunenburg County Ground Search and Rescue. And I would ask Councillor Staton if she'd be prepared to move that motion.
Certainly, thank you. Okay, I'm just trying to find it here. Okay, got it. To Her Honor Mayor Bolivar Getson, members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee and award a Comfort Center grant to Lunenburg County Ground Search and Rescue in the amount of $3,795.
Moved by Councillor Staton, seconded by Councillor Wynot. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Staton.
Just a quick question. I know they're waiting for this money to be in the bank account before they order the generator, so may I suggest that we get the check out to them as soon as possible?
Yeah, once the motion is passed,
Once it's
then it
exactly.
goes through the process,
Exactly.
but it
Yeah.
usually doesn't take very long.
Well, no, but I'm just saying they're waiting for the installation and they need the money in the bank account before they actually do the
Okay.
work.
Any further discussion on the motion? Question has been called for. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. We'll move down to 10.1.3, Midville and District Fire Department Comfort Center Grant, and I would ask Councillor Hubley if she'd be prepared to move that motion.
Yes, thank you. To Her Honor Mayor Bolivar Getson and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee and award a Comfort Center grant to the Midville and District Fire Department to a maximum of $8,000, depending on the receipt of provincial funding. And I so move.
Moved by Councillor Hubley, seconded by Councillor Bell. Discussion on the motion. Again, they have applied for some provincial money as well and are waiting to see if they get that to move forward with their grant. Question called for. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. 11.1.1 Designated Communities Fund Project. And again, this is money that we collect for organizations to issue tax receipts for them, and then we reimburse them the money after we get it. So I would ask if Councillor DeLong would be prepared to move that motion.
Certainly, thank you. To Her Honor, Mayor Bolivar Getson and members of council, I move that municipal council grant the Lunenburg Yacht Club $47,620 as per the criteria outlined in policy 048, Designated Community Project Fund, and I so move.
Moved by Councillor DeLong. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Vino. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Is our 9:15 presenter? Laura? Yes? Okay. I think we will go to our 9:15 presentation. And this is the Human Rights Remedy and Laura Church. So welcome, and the podium is yours.
Thank you so much. If you can't hear me, let me know. It's just awkward speaking to a microphone when you're not used to it. So,
You can, there's a
Yes.
button there to raise the podium.
okay.
There
Thank
you
you. So my name is Laura Church. I live in Bars Corner, so local here to the municipality. I'm the executive director for an organization called the Nova Scotia Residential Agencies Association, or NSRAA. And it is I'll just move to the side. So NSRA we're a nonprofit. And it's a coalition of community-based service providers all across Nova Scotia. So it's a provincial organization made up of currently 53 other member organizations, a few of them based here in Lunenburg County. So as the ED, I sit on provincial advisory groups and represent the sector on several committees and working groups. One of those is a provincial advisory group on the remedy, which we'll talk about. But just as a kind of an aside, I also was recently selected to the Provincial Accessible Transportation Standards Development Committee to represent rural communities here in Nova Scotia around accessible transportation. So the Human Rights Remedy is a human rights court case that was finalized in 2021. And it was a disability rights coalition, which is a coalition of self-advocates and lawyers who sued the province, as well as 3 separate individuals with disabilities who sued the province saying that their human rights were being violated, and they won. So those 3 individuals won compensation. The Disability Rights Coalition won in the sense that there were 4 findings of systemic discrimination. Those included unnecessary institutionalization of persons with disabilities, discrimination against their right to assistance, and discrimination, denial of community of choice. People are often put somewhere, not asked where they want to live, and delays in assistance. So, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't use PowerPoint as often, so my apologies. Just trying to get down to my presenter notes. Around these findings apply to things like people were experiencing severely long wait lists. We have families who've been on the wait list for service, families who have adult children with intellectual and developmental disabilities who've been on the wait list for a decade or more. So the wait list here in Nova Scotia was one of the big findings of discrimination, as well as that unnecessary institutionalization. So, and we're not just talking about larger institutions, which we have one here in Lunenburg County, but we're also talking about young people being forced into, say, long-term care. So people in their 20s and 30s and 40s being told that there's no other place for them to be supported other than long-term care, which is an appropriate setting. And one of the other really important things to know is that our province has been working towards closing institutions for a long time. They previously had a plan called the Roadmap. So you're going to experience a lot of families and a lot of individuals who are cynical about this new plan called the Remedy to close institutions because they've had promises broken before. So the province has made promises about doing this work. It wasn't fulfilled. That 10-year roadmap that time has passed. But now there's a human rights court case. So whenever you kind of come up against that, it's really important to remind people this is a human rights court case. And so there is a human rights court case process to hold the province accountable to making sure these timelines are met. And just so you know what the timeline is, it was a 5-year timeline. The province and this Disability Rights Coalition, they agreed upon these 2 experts to come in and write the remedy report. And that report outlined, like I said, a 5-year timeline, of which we are more than 1 year into it. So technically, we are 20% through this remedy process. Now my slides won't move. Okay, so as I said, it lies out a 5-year timeline. All large institutions are slated to be closed in the next 3 years. Again, there is one here in Lunenburg County, but they are located all over the province. There are 6 others. One, the 8th one has already been closed. It was closed last year in Yarmouth. The other thing, though, which you may or may not know, is that small option homes or group homes also will have a maximum of 4 people in it. So that is another part of this process. So those homes that house like 6, 7, sometimes 12 people will also be closed in the sense that they will have to be reduced down to 4 people. So in some cases, that might mean organizations buying and selling property and having to support people in different ways. And it also means that we are repatriating people back into their communities of choice, which is a really, really exciting time for Nova Scotians in general, but certainly Nova Scotians with disabilities. It also means a lot of new types of support programs and ways of people accessing supports are being created. So you're going to hear lots of things about individualized funding, home sharing, all kinds of new ways of people being supported in community that maybe aren't happening here in Nova Scotia, but are happening in other places in Canada and around the world. And so I'm here just maybe to talk about your role and why I'm here. Part of why I'm here is because I just want people to know, because I find that, for instance, I met recently with some library folks and they had no idea about the remedy. And we know that library folks are really connected in our communities and serve a lot of the people that our organizations support. So a couple of things, making sure your community is inclusive, like asking the kinds of questions about inclusive communities and what that means to be inclusive. I mean, it's not just about sidewalks being accessible, but if people with disabilities are out and about shopping, are they experiencing ableism or discrimination, which does happen. We hear stories about those kinds of things happening, things like, are you allowed to be here on your own, talking to an adult just because they have a disability. So those kinds of things, talking about your community, what does it mean to be inclusive, educating ourselves and other people about the rights of people with disabilities, encouraging businesses and landlords to be inclusive. And again, I'm not just meaning physically inclusive, although that is exceptionally important, but being inclusive of understanding that adults with intellectual disabilities have the same rights to live, work, play, and access our communities as those of us who don't have disabilities, and talking about the remedy and the impacts, the positive impacts it'll be on our community. I mean, we all know about worker shortages. Individuals with disabilities are a workforce that is being underutilized in this province. So there's a whole bunch of ways that we can talk about the remedy, make sure people know about the remedy, make sure we know about the impacts of the remedy. There are many hundreds and hundreds of individuals with intellectual disabilities in the next 4 years who will be leaving those large institutional settings and coming back to their communities, some of them for the first time in decades. And so there's a whole bunch of layers of things that come with that. There's trauma-informed approaches, there's accessible communities, there's communities who maybe aren't used to seeing their neighbors with intellectual disabilities amongst them in ways that will start to happen in Nova Scotia's future. So the last piece is maybe just engaging with a self-advocacy group separate from my paid employment role. I am an advisor to the People's First Lunenburg County chapter. People's First is a group of self-advocates. It is a self-advocacy run group. And I know that at some point in the future, they would also love to come here and talk to you all about what it means to be a self-advocate, what their experiences are in community, and maybe what they see as priorities for Lunenburg County specifically as far as becoming more inclusive and accepting of people with disabilities. So that is the quick and dirty about the remedy. I could talk about it for hours, but I know that's not what you want, so.
Well, we definitely welcome the uninstitutionalized setting, and I think that this is definitely a step in the right direction. And the communities will definitely be a lot more diverse and a lot more inclusive, and it's where individuals do belong, in their own
Diverse communities are
communities.
strong communities.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Questions? Councillor DeLong.
Thank you. I'm wondering, do you have any connection to the Lunenburg County Accessibility Advisory Committee?
I don't,
Mm-hmm.
but some of the members within NSRA do.
Yeah.
So I just happen to live in Lunenburg County. I'm part of a provincial group, and so most of my work is at the provincial level. But some NSRA members do. But if you have a connection, I would also be really happy to make it.
Yeah, no, I sit on that committee, and I was just thinking that
Fantastic.
this presentation would probably be very helpful to give to them as well.
Would love to do that if we have a way. I'll find a way to connect with
Sure.
you because I would absolutely love to talk.
sure,
to
for
them.
sure.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a supplemental?
Absolutely supplementary.
Thank you. So you say that the large institutions are being shut down. Does this pertain to Bonnie Lee Farm too?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Can
So
you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so Bonnie Lee Farm is a member organization. They're one of the two here in Lunenburg County. Just for reference, the other is Balsam, which was formerly Riverview, just here in Bridgewater. So Bonnie Lee Farm is a bit of, I don't know what it's going to look like because they're not technically a large institution, so they are not one of the 7 identified large institutions. But they are a unique setting in which there are small option homes but clustered together. So I think, honestly, there's not going to be a ton of change to Bonnie Lee Farm. But in the future, the province will not be doing cluster living like that. So small option homes will be scattered, not grouped together, because that is that kind of gray area. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, the province is not looking to disrupt people's lives who want to live the way they're currently living. So while there might be some people who say, I want to stay in an institution, they can't because that's been found to be a human rights violation. In a lot of other cases where there's this kind of gray area about it's clustered, but it's not institutional, people will almost certainly have the right to have a say about that and stay if they want to stay, which is my understanding. Most people at Bonnie Lee Farm want to stay.
Any further comments, questions? The time frame associated with this under the court action was how long?
It was a total of 5 years, and we are 4 years into it. And that is the full implementation, but the actual closure of institutions is slated to be completed in the next 3 years, with that 4th year to be focused on those like group home settings, because they are kind of a lower priority. So we talk about closing large institutions, but even the larger group homes, as I said, will have to be reduced down to a maximum of 4 people per home. And those are kind of slated to be dealt with at the end of that 5-year plan. So in year 4 to 5.
So we feel that you're on schedule to be doing,
Sorry, I totally should have mentioned that. So you can see the updates. I'm happy to send out a link if you
Okay.
want to look. But the Disability Rights Coalition and on the Human Rights Court case, at the end of May, the province submitted their updated progress report. They have to do one every year. So May 30th, that was due. And then the Disability Rights Coalition responds to that, and that happened at the end of June. And at the end of this month, at the end of July, there's a court-appointed third-party separate monitor who replies and says, okay, the province has met a lot of target areas according to the report. They're behind in some other target areas, and then they have to give reasoning about why they're behind. And sometimes they have really good reasons why they're behind, but it's that third-party monitor who makes that decision about whether or not that reason essentially is good enough, or whether they have to go back through some sort of court remediation process. That court report, that monitor is due at the end of this month. It'll probably be made public the first week of August.
so we have small option homes currently,
Yes.
and they house up to 4, is it?
Small option homes can house up to 5 or 6 technically.
So they will
but at
have
the
to
end
come
of the
down
rest,
to 4.
They'll have to come down to 4, that's
Okay,
correct.
but
Yeah.
that model is still going to exist.
Absolutely, it is still going to exist, except the province is not building anymore. So they have said they will not be building any more small option homes, that is a brick and mortar solution, and with housing as it is, it's also still not best practice in the sense
Okay.
that the more in community a person is, the better. That does not mean that they are not good models for some people, but the province will not be building any more new small option homes. That's not the direction they're going, but they're also not closing them.
Okay, but the supports will still be there in the new
Yes.
homes
Yeah,
that
it'll just be,
the
yeah, they'll
residents
be
will-
in that
yes.
way, and absolutely, and there'll be new models of support as well. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Councillor Hobley?
Just a quick question. You said that these group homes house up to 13 people and
Yeah.
you're going to go down to 4.
Yeah.
I'm worried about adequate housing for the people that will be moved out.
Yeah, it's a genuine worry. I don't have the complete answer for you. There aren't any, as far as I know, of that size in Lunenburg County, but I'll give an example. There's one in really rural Cape Breton in Inverness that houses 12 people currently. Inverness is a really rural place. Where are they going to buy housing? And so those are the kinds of things we're starting project work to, my role isn't, because I don't work for the province, my role is to support organizations. So we're bringing in things like builders to talk about, they're probably going to be selling and buying new property, but also those people, some of those people may be supported in other ways, like home sharing or independent living with certain supports, different kinds of models. But there is significant concern about in Inverness, even selling that home. It's not about the finances of selling it and buying, say, 2 or 3 more. It's about where do I go to buy 2 or 3 more. So those are true concerns that we all have, and unfortunately, I don't have the answer. Housing is a problem. We'll have to see how that pans out, unfortunately, yeah. They will not be made homeless. I can tell you the province isn't just going to say you have
No.
to close and go homeless. That
No.
I can guarantee is not,
Yeah.
that is anti-remedy. So that is not going to be on the table. What would be more likely is a timeline might be extended in that case, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Bell?
Thank you. When you look at facilities like Riverview Enhanced Living and other facilities that are in the area, a lot of these facilities have a common 7-passenger bus or
Yeah.
other larger vehicle, and it allows the residents to have outings or go shopping or go sightseeing. I would see that this would become a problem for homes that only had 4 tenants. Like, trying to improve their living standard one way, I can see these residents losing out in the chance to have mobility. Has that been taken into consideration in this overall change?
A little bit. I'll say that that's why I'm really passionate about and applied for that Accessible Transportation Standards Development Committee, because I'm also worried about accessible transportation, especially in rural settings. I'll use the example of Riverview. That Riverview actually does a pretty good job because they have that facility, but they also have small option homes and people supported and independent living supports. And they currently do a model where they have vehicles and then homes book it. So they might have one vehicle for a couple different homes, but those 2 different homes could access it. But accessible vehicles is a problem. I will, in the province's credit, say last year they did buy some new accessible vehicles for organizations through an application process, and I anticipate that that will be, it's something we are also advocating for and will continue to push for, is more accessible transportation, because organizations frankly can't afford the $120,000 for accessible vehicles, but people living in community doesn't mean anything if they can't access and go out and access their communities. So we're working with organizations to try to be creative around sharing vehicles within, like Riverview currently does for their other programs where people live. But transportation, housing, and staffing are 3 of the big issues that we don't have full answers for, but we're continuing to work with the province on finding solutions. I'm sorry, I know it's not a satisfactory answer.
No, but I wanted to mention it because
Yeah.
I think that that's a very important part that needs to be considered. And we who have transportation
Yeah.
may not look at those little things that are very important to other people.
it makes me so happy you're asking those questions, because to me that says you're looking at, is my community accessible enough, and what we should be looking at. So you guys asking those questions truly makes me feel like communities are getting it, because those are the questions. Because the last thing we want is for people to move out of large institutions into small institutions where they can't go anywhere, really. There was an expert the province brought in from New Zealand whose quote was, "Institutionalization is a mindset, not a place." And it's true. Just because people live in a large setting, they could live in a small setting and it be isolating and lonely and institutionalized. And that's the last thing we want, is to move people into community and isolate them from that community. Just because you're living in doesn't mean you can access it the way that I have the privilege with a car to access. And so it is things we're thinking about, but they don't necessarily have answers yet. Yeah.
Hearing that the supports will follow.
We're
with the
advocating for the
individ-
supports.
yes.
Listen, I don't work for government, I work for a nonprofit, but I will say the government is truly working hard
Yeah.
on this. They have something like 70 projects currently, like a 5-year timeline is ambitious.
Absolutely.
I came from BC. BC took a couple of decades to close their institutions. And so 5 years is a very ambitious, a very tight timeline, and they are working really, really hard on it. It doesn't mean they get everything right, and that's my job, is to advocate when they don't get everything right and to push for those sorts of things. But it's going to be at times messy. It is going to be at times tough, but it is also going to be a really beautiful process where people get to be in their communities once again.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for your presentation, and I look forward to watching the updates as they're posted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
So we will move down to, just got to get my agenda back. 10.1.1, repeal and replace policy 008, records management. And I will turn it over to Alex to walk us through this.
Good morning, council members. So if you'll recall, we had a presentation from your municipal clerk last Tuesday at Policy and Strategy Committee. On the proposed changes to our records management policy. So I won't bore you with a full repeat of April's presentation, but I will hit some highlights for you. Just a quick overview of some of the proposed changes. So the old policy was approved in 1999. We've changed some of the ways that we write policy since then. So we've expanded a number of points in the purpose of the policy to make it more clear what we're intending to do with the policy. There's also a definition section, again, to help with interpretation, and a responsibilities section. So this sets out
Do we have this up on screen?
what up on
No,
screen.
no, he's just talking.
Oh, okay, you're just talking.
Yeah.
I had to go do that first.
Yeah. All good,
Okay, great.
all good.
So there's a responsibility section. It sets out the role for council, the CAO, the municipal clerk, and individual staff members. It designates the clerk as a responsible employee for records management, so this includes FOIPOP as well as the schedules and the disposal of records. There's new language around privacy and security, which were not concerns that were addressed well in the old policy. And we've added a section which creates routine access. So this is by policy allowing staff to release whole classes of records without having to put a resident through the FOIPOP application process. I did want to give a quick note just about the process that goes into reviewing a policy. So this is an internal policy. It's not addressing how we run a program, for example. It's addressing how we do things internally. Normally this type of review would be generated either by staff identifying that we have an out-of-date policy, or a council member bringing it to the table and council directing for it to be reviewed. So once it gets identified as a project, a lead department is assigned. They will consult with the relevant staff who work with the policy on a day-to-day basis. They'll prepare revisions, and then after consulting with those staff that are doing the work, they'll bring it to our, what we call the SMT, or Strategic Management Team. So there'll be an internal review there. There may be some redrafts, and then a final version with the summary will come and a report to either Finance Committee or Policy and Strategy. So I just wanted to bring this up in terms of the timeline for this policy. I manage the administration department as part of my duties as the deputy CAO, which includes the municipal clerk. And when I arrived in 2013, I identified that there was no routine access policy. So that's something I've been interested in revising for 10 years now. When we moved from the old building to this building, we did a large-scale scanning of documents. So you may recall, actually, we went through a procurement process because it was expensive to have all of that scanning work done. So that was a major trigger that we needed to update our policy. The old policy didn't address the fact that we had electronic records. And work began in earnest in 2023. On the revisions to the policy. So I know that there have been some concerns from members of the public that this is a sudden review prompted by FOIPOP applications. That's not the case. We have FOIPOP applications which occur regularly. So we have a larger volume than most of our neighbors, but they're a regular occurrence. So I just wanted to provide some assurance to council. This was a normal review of a policy. It began in late 2023. Drafts were going back and forth internally. So it's not as a result of a particular FOIPOP application. A couple of key points to focus on. There's some changes in the new policy that expand both privacy, but also records retention and access to them. So both policies outline a list of types of documents which cannot be destroyed. They are permanent record of the municipality. The new policy actually expands documents that can be included in there. So April noted last week, for example, council agendas used to not fall under that permanent retention schedule. They've been added. Some other things which were raised this morning during public input was cemetery records and legal information. So the list of things which are permanently kept by policy has been expanded. There's also some material there about privacy and duplication of records and efficiency. I just wanted to help clarify some of the purpose around that. One of the things that slows down FOIPOP applications is the sheer volume of records that get caught up in a request. And unfortunately, a large volume of those are actually duplicates. So everybody knows how CCing emails works. A record of an email can appear dozens of times. So if a FOIPOP is submitted, there's an email captured, but it was copied to multiple staff members and council, it's going to appear in each one of the council members' emails, each of those staff's emails. So the policy is trying to have those emails identified as records and then a single copy retained rather than the 17, for example. So that reduces the amount of staff time that's required to complete a FOIPOP application, which actually makes it easier to get FOIPOP applications processed and provided to the residents. And I guess I would also like to provide some clarity around the discretion of the records manager for the retention schedules. So just to be absolutely crystal clear, any retention of documents which is outlined in the policy, those are set by policy. That's a decision of council. So something that is classified for permanent retention cannot be disposed of by a records manager because it's set out in policy. So where there's discretion, the most frequent instance where that's applied is the records manager receives a batch of records from a department saying these are ready for destruction, and the records manager identifies there's some historical value in this, or this is related to a file which may be useful to council in the future, and I'm going to remove this from the disposal schedule, and I'm going to retain this for a longer period of time. So that's the most common area. There is some discretion around retention for shorter transitory records. But again, that's sort of the variance between a 7-year retention schedule. And those decisions are based on the advice that's given in the model records management manual, which is produced by the Association of Municipal Administrators. The last 2 points I'd like to make is there is a change in the standard retention schedule for what are termed transitory records. So the old policy had 10 years. This is a shift to 7 years. And the rationale for that is we are shifting to following the model manual, which is produced by the Provincial Association for Administrators. This lines up with provincial standards for record keeping, and it will create a cohesive schedule for us so that we're following best practice in records management. Now, it is a change, so I can understand where there may have been some concern. The rationale for it is moving to the AMA records manual. And then there was a question about the authority of the records manager to authorize destruction. So that is a change from the previous policy, which allowed for the CAO to do that. The process that happens in the background is a department will identify they have records which have exceeded the retention period. They will provide the listing of that to the records manager. The clerk then goes through that to identify if there's anything that needs to be pulled out for other reasons. And then that form currently is provided to the CAO, who then signs off on the destruction. The current policy, or the proposed policy, would permit the records manager to make that decision themselves. We found that that process is more efficient, as the CAO isn't actually a staff person that's going through and doing the review of the records. But certainly if that's an area for concern, we can have some more discussion about that today.
Councillor Hubley.
Were you done, Alex? Okay, so I had questions from a few residents. I think you've answered them, but I'm going to put them out there so you can directly answer them. So they were concerned with what level of governments and other municipalities have internal access to these records, and do any other institutions or corporations have internal access to these records?
So I think
Yes, thank you. So I can answer some of that, and I know there's a follow-up question about a particular organization. So as standard practice, the municipality does provide information to the provincial government, and that has been a long-standing practice in defined areas, including finance and building. But we provide it. They don't have the ability to access our internal documents, so we control those. And if there's a request for the members of the public under FOIPOP, we follow that process and we provide the information. And if there's information that we're providing to the province, like financial information or building permit information to PVSC, that's provided by us to them. So they can't access our internal documents, but we do provide internal information to them. But it's in very limited and it's prescribed. So if the provincial government tells us we must provide it, then we must provide it. We are a creature of the province. But externally, organizations cannot access our information. And we have IT and cybersecurity in place to make every effort to stop the illegal intrusion of our private information. And I know there's a specific question about the ICLEI.
Well, that's how I spelled it, but it is pronounced ICLEI. And
Yeah,
I've
so it's
since, okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I wasn't familiar with this organization, so I had to look it up. So it's the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It was established in 1990. The organization has more than 200 local governments from 43 countries. It is active in Canada. I checked the ICLIE membership list of Canadian municipalities, which is available on their website. We are not a member, and from my review, it doesn't appear that any Nova Scotia municipalities are members. But some of the larger municipalities like Toronto are involved in that. But even if we were involved, for them to get our information, they would have to request it, and we would then provide it. So through FOIPOP or some kind of memorandum of understanding. So our information is as secure as we can make it. And then what we've done with the records retention policy is tried to make it easier for residents or applicants to get information through routine access, which currently doesn't exist. Our management policy is from 1995, so privacy legislation has changed considerably since that time.
Councillor Stanton.
Thank you. I just have one question, if I might. Alex indicated that if there was records to be disposed of, that it was at the discretion of one person. And I would certainly like to see that changed, that it would be reviewed by more than one person. Do you understand what I'm asking you?
I do, yeah. Just to clarify, it's never the case that a single person is doing the review. So the authority rests with the records manager. Usually, the form that summarizes, pulls together all those is not done by the records manager. It's done by a records management assistant, or it's done by a manager or director in that department. And quite often, the executive assistant to the CAO is also involved in that review. I think the question is more around who does that approval. It wouldn't ever be a single person that does that review, but the new policy provides that authority to the records manager. The old policy had it with the CAO.
Okay, and if I misunderstood, then I'm sure a lot of other people, especially the public, probably misunderstood that process when you're saying it's done by, or authorized by one person.
Councillor Haysom.
Thank you. I understand that there is a specific timeline for retaining some types of documents, okay. And so there's going to be a shift around transitory records. And maybe it would be helpful if you could identify or give an example of what a transitory record is compared to some of the other records that we keep for longer periods of time.
Sure. So financial records, accounts payable, accounts receivable, would be considered a transitory record. So we keep those for 7 years. After 7 years, they're destroyed.
Councillor Vino.
I have questions around the logistics. Alex, going back 10 years ago when I was in recreation, we had banker boxes of records. It was very easy to look at 11 years ago, bring in that box, as an admin person, that then went to the team, then it went to municipal clerk, then it went to CEO. Everybody had to sign off on this box of records. With so many items being digital now, how do you figure out what has now been past that timeline? I guess is the question I'm wondering, just the logistics of how you find those digital records as opposed to, it's very easy to go get a box and see the years on it and get rid of it. But digital, I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, for those types of records, it's actually the same process. So if you have like grant applications from a set of years, they're not kept in a banker's box anymore, but they're kept in a folder that's labeled by year. So it works the same way. And again, someone's designated as a record management assistant in that department. Usually it's an administrative type role. So someone that had been in your position would do the same thing. They'd identify those records. It'd be passed up through your director to the records manager, who would then complete that process.
And I guess that also kind of verifies the point that it goes through several different people before it comes to the records management. Would that work the same for emails as well, with disposal of email records? If you could speak just briefly to that.
So that would depend on how the email had been handled. So if it was filed, for example, it was in relation to a grant application and got filed with the grant application, it would follow that same process. If it had not been filed, then I'm going to actually see if Tina has a more clear answer for me on that. But emails are currently kept in either filed or also in our IT system.
Yes, it just depends on what the nature of the email would be. If it's regarding an actual file, a project, it would go in the project file, or it can just go into a correspondence area by year. It just really depends on the nature of the email.
Thank you, that answers both my questions.
But they are there. Deputy Mayor Oigel.
Thank you. So after last week's PSC discussion, I kind of went over everything again and listened to everything again, and I do have a couple questions, but before my two questions, I'd like to see two signatures. I'm just saying a signature, or however the RM decides that a certain record is to be destroyed, just because of, in our day and age now, mistakes can be easily made with the touch of a button, as well as just for the protection, legal protection of the RM, which is the record manager, to have two people sign off and approve that that record can be destroyed, rather than putting all that responsibility on one person, to have more than one person, having that responsibility. So my questions are regarding the routine access document list. So under Appendix A, it mentions specifically things that are listed on a website, but I'm wondering about Facebook, right? Because Facebook isn't mentioned there. And also, underneath responsibilities, it said that council's responsibility is to review the policy. And I did not see anywhere in there a policy review schedule. So I'm just wondering about those two questions, and just my comment that I think we should have two people signing off or okaying a document destruction.
Yeah, so just in relation to the number of people, the departments or records are housed by department, and so there actually are two signatures on the form. The director of the department signs it, and then the records manager finalizes it. And in this case, currently the CAO then also signs it, so that would be a third. This is switching it to two. And then your other question was about?
It says things that are on the website would be under routine access, but I'm wondering about saying Facebook, because sometimes things are on Facebook, on our Facebook page, but not necessarily on our website. So I'm just wondering if Facebook should be mentioned there as well or not. It's just a thought.
I'm just scanning.
Appendix A,
quickly
if you're just looking for it.
Language, yeah. Yeah, so item 7 in the appendix refers to any newsletter, advertisement, or other document publicly distributed by the municipality. So rather than identify a particular company's channel of social media, we try and be general, because who knows, in 5 years, Facebook might not be the thing, and whiz-bangs are what everybody's using. So a Facebook post would be covered under item 7 of the appendix, because it's another publicly distributed channel of the municipalities.
Okay, all right. And then regarding under responsibilities of council to review, and there
Yes.
is not within the policy a
Yeah.
date for those reviews.
I would dearly like to establish a regular schedule for all policies to be reviewed. We currently don't have the staff resources. As I mentioned, I arrived in 2013, and I identified that I wanted a routine access clause built into our records policy, and it took me 10 years to get there. So we just don't have policy staff available to conduct those levels of review. So we haven't identified a schedule for that to occur. If we were to go down that road, we would need more staff in order to ensure that all of our policies were done that way. Currently, we rely on, have we encountered an issue? Is there a legislative change, or is there direction from council?
Thank you.
Just making sure you were hesitating. Councillor Hobley, please.
I think it's ironic that we're reviewing this records retention policy now, right after one of the largest glitches in recent history. So my concern is these companies that back up our records and information are not liable, so they can't be sued for breaches and glitches. And I have a fair feeling there'll be more of those in the future. I think these companies should be regulated, but that's neither here nor there. My point is, in a day of breaches and glitches, I don't want us to rely on one software company to back up our information. And do we use one? Do we use two? Just for the safety of the records.
So we do have backup systems in place. I don't feel competent to speak to you about those. We share IT services with the Municipal Joint Services Board. So they have a system for cybersecurity as well as backup. So whether it's accidental or a software glitch by another company, or if it's malicious, they have steps in place and they have been audited for those. But I'm not comfortable responding to the details of them. It's certainly something we could get more information for council on. I do see it as separate from the records management policy. This is dictating what is a record and how do you handle it, whereas that's more an IT question, which I'm not trying to say is not a valid question to ask about, and certainly in light of the events last Friday.
Yeah, true, and I can get that information from MJSB too. I just wondered if you had it. Awesome, thank you.
So, and I guess my recollection is that's how we actually got to our own IT, was to make sure that our files and everything were secure and that they were not stored in one location, that they were split up. But that's an MJSB question, but it's definitely how we got to where we did with the IT, because in the past, it definitely wasn't a very secure environment.
Thank you.
Councillor DeLong.
Thank you, and thank you for clarifying a lot of these points. It's definitely putting my mind at ease. There's been a lot of, online discussion and questions to councillors, in particular about FOIPOP applications. I would love it if you could just kind of break down into nuts and bolts what the previous method for FOIPOP was and how it will be accomplished under the new policy.
So there's actually no change to the FOIPOP process. FOIPOP is just for the purpose of the recording, that stands for Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy. It's established in the Municipal Government Act, so we don't have the authority to change that. The province has set out, and there's some really wonderful preamble language in that part. It's part 20 of the Act. It talks about the reasons why residents should have access to information. It allows for engaged and informed decision-making and participation from the citizenry. So it's a beautiful part of the Act, actually. We don't create that process. We follow it as it's set out, and the province has a FOIPOP review office to do a small amount of oversight. They're horrendously understaffed, but the process essentially is residents can submit a request for any type of information that they believe the government has a record on. And this applies to all levels of government for us. So you can a citizen can submit a record request to the municipality. We have a small application fee, and then There's a scan done to collect the records so that we can get an assessment of the volume of work that's required. There can be processing fees because sometimes it's enormous amounts of records depending on how the request is crafted. So there has to be a scan and an evaluation, especially now that we've moved to e-records. It's much easier to scan and get a more comprehensive list, but it also catches more documents than wanted. So you put in like a keyword recreation, for example, it's going to catch, thousands of documents. There has to be a scan for relevance, and then there has to be a screening against the privacy and security qualifications that are in the Freedom of Information section. So if there's third-party information, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't be released, but it has to be scanned, and then usually the third party has to be notified that someone's made a request for that record. So all of those steps, I guess I didn't quite finish. You do all of the scans, you send out the notifications, you make redactions where you have to, if there's confidential information or personal information, business information that's legally required to be omitted, and then that's released to the resident. All of that still exists, the same process exists. The only change is that by policy, we're allowing for routine access. So where there's information that we know doesn't contain private information, for example, we've already published it, we don't have to push a resident through a FOIPOP application process. They don't have to pay a fee. We can simply release that information. So other than allowing for not needing the FOIPOP process, there's no change to the FOIPOP process.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Demerit for his recap presentation done in a slow manner, easy to understand, and very quick to answer any of the questions so far. I'm trying to think of a question that might catch him, but it's interesting that we talk about FOIPOP applications. One of the questions that I have, if there were, say, 100 requests made in FOIPOP, did we ever consider the fact that maybe 35 of those came from one single person? Do we ever publish the information of who is requesting FOIPOP applications? They may come from a very small sector of individuals who, for whatever reason, want to keep a very close scrutiny on everything that's going on. But that's their right if they wish to do so. But I think it's probably an understatement that the cost that is associated with producing an answer doesn't meet the amount that is paid by the individual or individuals who are requesting the information. Is quite time consuming, I am led to believe, to produce some of these answers. Is our rates set by the province? Do we recover the costs, or do we even break even? Or is this a cost that is shared by the entire taxpayer, but caused by very few individuals?
So with respect to publishing the names of folks that make FOIPOP applications, absolutely not. We don't do that. Generally, we try not to share, some of the language is in the policy itself. You don't want to share information beyond the folks that need it to complete the task that's required. So that's not something that we've ever considered, nor do we think that's an appropriate direction that we'd want to go. In terms of fees, I would have to say my philosophy since I've been here is that freedom of information is a really critical part of our democracy. It's a system to provide information to the public so that they can be engaged and informed. So there's real value to the public to have those avenues available. You look at the best quality reporting that's happening provincially and nationally. It's not from news outlets regurgitating press releases. It's from them doing access to information, using that critical tool to get information from governments, do analysis, and provide information to the public. So there's a real public value to the function. Based on that philosophy, we don't want to do anything to discourage residents coming forward and asking for information. So our general approach is, can we find a way to get this information without charging the resident, or at least cost? So if a resident submits a request for information and it's quite broad, and they may not be aware that the way that they frame the question will result in reams and reams of documents, we'll work with them to see if, is there particular information that you're looking for, so we can narrow this down and get you the information that you want without having to use a lot of staff time in the scanning for private and personal information that before we can release it. So we normally absorb all the costs of the screening and the discussions beforehand. Once we've finalized the list, we then generate a fee based on estimated staff hours to complete the review. And again, we do what we can to work with the resident to get them what they're looking for, with maintaining as much efficiency on staff time as we can. So to answer your question more briefly, we do not recover all the costs of FOIPOP. Part of that is a philosophical belief that it's an important part of how our government operates and how we should be providing information to the public. When the volume gets higher, it's more difficult for us to keep those costs low, and therefore the fees do end up getting passed on, but they don't recover all the costs.
Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you. Just on that point, council will recall that there were discussions with the MJSB about a regional privacy officer that would be shared between the town of Bridgewater, MODL, and town of Mahone Bay. And in reviewing and in working towards the background information on that, in 2023, our clerk spent in excess of 450 hours of staff time on FOIPOP applications. That's 25% of her year. And so what we're talking about is, as Alex indicated, it's an essential service, but it's very time consuming because you have to physically look at each record and every page in that record, because the first part of FOIPOP is freedom of information. The second part is protection of privacy. And you have to ensure that you don't disclose anything that breaches the protection of privacy sections. So that's the redaction of information. And so it's not just the gathering of the information based upon the request, it's in reviewing all that information to ensure that you're not inadvertently breaching privacy of individuals or third parties. And as Alex indicated, third parties have to be notified and then asked whether they're consenting to the release of the information, and if they're not, then there's a whole other level of discussion. So it is essential, it is important, it's valuable information to the public, but it's also time consuming, it's staff time that has to be put into it. And we do not try we don't try to break even on it. But we do have to assess the amount of time that's required to gather the information, properly review it. And as Alex indicated, it's not uncommon to get a very wide request and then work with the applicant to narrow the request and actually find out what it is they really want to see and try to get that to them, which improves our efficiency, it reduces the amount of time it takes, and it reduces whatever cost. But any fee we want to charge can be reviewed by the FOIPOP office for reasonableness. So just because we say we want to charge an amount doesn't necessarily mean we get to. So that's a third part of the whole equation.
Councillor Bell.
And the first point that Mr. McEwen made is what and why I answered the question, because I do believe that in order to produce quality work, it requires time and effort. And in our case of MODL, we have it assigned pretty well to one person who is using up a lot of time. If you want quality answers produced, then we have to consider on how important it is to provide this work, and if a shared position might need to be reassessed again with other local municipalities, because it's becoming probably a more necessary position as the general public want to question things. It's their right to do so, but it is our duty to provide the best possible answer, and it requires a lot of time.
Thank you. And I too want to comment, because I understand there were a lot of questions about the revisions to the records management policy, and I'd like to help clarify a few of those things. I know that Alex has gone over a lot of them, but if it's repetitive, so be it. So records management is an important government function and is governed by the Municipal Government Act. And I recall the days in the old municipal building and the buildings out back and everywhere else where we had all of our paper files. And when we moved over here, we began the electronic scanning and putting things into a proper format that would be a lot more easier accessible at the end of the day. The revised policy continues to provide for effective and efficient management of records and reflects the reality of the 21st century government operations, including the use of electronic records. The District of Lunenburg makes use of many channels to proactively share information with residents, including our website, social media, promotion, and through promotion and engagement campaigns. Residents can also contact staff via phone, email, and in person to get information about their municipal government. Records contain information needed for the day-to-day work of government. Their purpose is to provide reliable information about the who, what, when, and why for decisions and projects. Some records are transitory and should be destroyed on a regular basis when their usefulness has ended. The old and the new versions of the policy provide for the regular removal of transitory records. This has been a part of our records management process since well before the 1999 policy. I would also like to clarify that the updated records management policy still permits FOIPOP applications. So the urge to get everything in before today was not necessary. There will be FOIPOP, and there will be lots of opportunity to FOIPOP. In fact, the new policy is an improvement on transparency, as it includes routine access as a formal part of the policy. Routine access means releasing information without requiring a FOIPOP application. This approach has been used by municipal staff to save residents time and money in the past, where there were no privacy implications associated with releasing these records. It will now be part of the policy and sets out by policy that staff can release whole classes of records without requiring fees or application. So again, this is something that didn't happen overnight. This is a process that has been in place for many years and started with the scanning of the records to move into the review and to where we are here now. And at this time, I think that we've gone through our speakers, but I would like to have a motion on the floor in relation to this, and I would ask Deputy Mayor Oikel if she would be prepared to move the motion.
Certainly. To her honor, Mayor Bolivar-Getson and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee to repeal Policy 008 Records Management and replace it with the new Policy 008 Records Management and Routine Access as presented, and I so move.
So moved by Deputy Mayor Oikel. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor DeLong. Discussion on the motion. Counselor Moore.
Thank you. So going back to some of the miscommunication and stuff that's been over social media, it's just not left up to the records manager to authorize what gets kept and what gets destroyed after 7, 10 years, whatever. It goes through a record manager's assistant, if I'm reading this right on my screen, correct? It goes through 2 people.
Yep.
Yes, okay, thank you, yeah. That's what thought I was reading here, so it goes through 2 people anyway, so, yeah.
In terms of, yeah, the records manager has the final approval, the director of a department
Right.
review. The actual preparation is usually done by a records management assistant.
Okay,
The difference is, under the current policy, the CAO has the final sign-off.
Yeah.
Under this policy, the records manager does.
okay.
Deputy Mayor Oigel.
But first, the department decides what they want to get rid of, then they send it to the assistant.
They sign off on it
And
first.
then the assistant goes through it, and then the record. So really, it's almost 3 people.
Just the only
Right.
clarification is, it's less of deciding rather than following the schedules.
Yeah. Further discussion on the motion.
Question?
Question called for. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. I know it is 10:16 and our presenters are here, but if we could take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Welcome back to our council meeting. It is now 10:30. And I would like to welcome the South Shore Housing Action Coalition, Nancy Green, from the Nova Scotia Health Authority. So welcome. We need to get you a mic there first.
Hello.
Can lower or make the mic higher.
There we go. Is that better? Can you hear me? All right. Good morning, Your Worship, members of council, staff, and community members. As Mayor Getson mentioned, my name is Nancy Green, and I'm a member of the South Shore Housing Action Coalition, and I'm pleased to be joining you this morning. Briefly, I'm here to share information about the importance of non-market housing options in our communities, our current housing realities, opportunities for action, and to bring forward some considerations for council. SHAC, as we are known, is an active coalition which has been working since 2012 to build awareness and facilitate action on the need for improved access to healthy, safe, and affordable housing options across Lunenburg and Queens counties. We believe that housing is a human right. It is enshrined in Canadian law through the National Housing Strategy. We can all appreciate the importance of having a healthy, safe, and stable place to call home. It impacts our health and well-being, our communities, and our economy. We all have a responsibility to ensure that everyone in our community has access to healthy, safe, and affordable housing options that reflect the changing of housing needs throughout life. So why do non-market housing options matter? Let's have a quick look about what we know about housing in the municipality. The ability of a household to live in a community is not solely related to housing options. There are a number of community dynamics at play, some of which are noted on this slide. The current housing situation is reflective of the dynamics between housing, population, and economic realities. For additional context, I've provided on this slide, on the right-hand side of the slide, new data regarding poverty in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has the highest rate of poverty and rate of food insecurity among the provinces. And the child poverty rate in Lunenburg County has increased by nearly 10% since 2020. Certainly, the growing need in our communities is contributing to the current housing situation. You will notice at the bottom that among low-income families in Nova Scotia, nearly 70% are spending more than 30% of their income on shelter-related costs, and nearly 40% are spending 50% or more. And I apologize, this slide says Bridgewater, it should say Modal. This is the housing spectrum, which shows the range of housing options required for the health and sustainability of communities, and reflects the changing needs of households. Those within the yellow box note where non-market housing options exist. Currently, there are very few non-market housing options in Modal. There are 5 family and 30 senior public housing units operated by the Nova Scotia Public Housing Agency. Dr. Catherine Levitin-Reid from Cape Breton University recently shared that 89% of rental housing stock is privately owned and operated in Nova Scotia. There has traditionally been little investment in and intentional focus on non-market housing options in Nova Scotia. We have looked to the housing market to meet needs. However, it is unable to meet the needs of everyone. The market controls the vast majority of rental housing, and other than the current rent gap in place on occupied units, there is little regulation to protect the affordability of housing. Even the affordability standards set by CMHC are based on average market rents. So the market is determining affordability rather than affordability reflecting what households' incomes are. Supporting the development of non-market housing options is an opportunity for investment in the community and can help ensure the affordability of housing. We're often asked, what is affordable housing, or what is affordable? Well, affordable housing is housing that is affordable and depends on a number of factors, including a household income, size, their needs, etc. We encourage you to examine your local context to determine what affordability looks like. This information on this slide is intended to provide some perspective to affordability in the municipality. Spending more than 30% of household income on shelter-related costs, which includes rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, is an indicator of financial strain and is a marker for affordability in a community. The numbers on the slide show what a household would need to be earning to afford average shelter costs reported on the census. The average shelter cost for tenant households is $838 a month, and for homeowners, $814. To the right-hand side of the slide, we see that a single minimum wage earner who works 40 hours per week could afford shelter costs that do not exceed $730 a month. Finally, the bottom portion of the slide shows an affordable shelter cost for various households earning a median income in the municipality. And you can see that even households with a median income are struggling with affordability, in particular the one-person households. At $850 a month is what they can afford, but the average monthly shelter costs within the municipality is $838. The Nova Scotia Housing Need Report for Modal provides further evidence that a home ownership and rental housing is unaffordable for many households in the community. There has been a lack of ongoing qualitative and quantitative data collection about housing needs in our region, which has resulted in the invisibilization or misunderstanding of the extent of the need for housing for all in our communities. The Housing Needs Report has brought to light some of the issues our communities are facing. A resident survey reported in the municipality's housing report shows that housing options are limited. Affordability and availability of housing is a concern for many, and that the rising cost of living is having an impact. We also know from conversations in our community that housing security and homelessness exist. The use of fixed-term leases and seasonal evictions are contributing to household insecurity locally. And finally, the lack of access to public housing, coupled with its long wait lists, indicates our current non-market housing options are insufficient for the need. We believe that the growth of non-market housing options is necessary to address these issues. There is an opportunity for the municipality to intentionally support the development of non-market housing options to ensure affordable, accessible, and suitable housing options for those whose needs are not able to be met by market housing. And we noted for momentum, I apologize, I don't believe that the municipality has a policy waiving development fees for nonprofit housing. However, we would encourage you to consider that. We do recognize, however, that the municipality is taking steps in the right direction to identify and prioritize actions to address housing need. In particular, your Housing Accelerator Fund application that I know wasn't funded this round, but I understand you'll be applying again. Having identified those initiatives is a wonderful first step, and we applaud you for that. And I suspect that through your Modal 2040 planning process, you will be hearing about housing concerns in the community and needs and exploring that. So we recognize that engagement that you're doing with the community, and thank you for that. Finally, we ask you to consider how are you going to prioritize and support non-market housing development? What actions can the town take to address the needs of all residents? And we offer up the following as opportunities. Implement those Housing Accelerator Fund application or those initiatives regardless of funding. And I was pleased to hear from Reed this morning that you're intending to reapply for that funding. We are happy to offer support in any way that we can around this work. We encourage you to look beyond the numbers and to understand experiences of housing need. Bring attention to and engage the voices that are not being heard. Other councils have begun to receive monthly data reports at council meetings from the South Shore Open Doors Association. You may want to consider doing this as well to keep you informed. We encourage you to use available information to make evidence-informed decisions. We have never had more information or data about housing need in our communities than we do now. We also encourage you to learn about best practices, explore tools available to address housing needs and pressures. There's options including landlord registries, tourism taxes, vacancy taxes, all of which could be used to fund housing efforts. We encourage you to support the development of community capacity for non-market housing options. We encourage you to learn what other communities are doing, advocate for changes to enable or support non-market housing development, and partner and engage with the community to explore options. And I know that that's something that this council has done in the past. Unfortunately, the project didn't move forward at Centre School, but we applaud you for your efforts in supporting that opportunity. And finally, we'd encourage you to learn about non-market housing types that aren't traditional or common in our area, including housing trusts and co-ops, and possibly explore becoming a member of the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. You have the power to have an impact and leave a legacy. The decisions you make today will have impacts in the future. It is your decision to make with the best interests of your community in mind. We encourage you to consider the evidence, the experiences, the needs, and your opportunities and options. Your community is counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for your presentation. Questions? Councillor Haysom.
Thank you so much. Not so much a question, but some comments. And this is, I think it's always really sobering when we start to see those poverty rates in Nova Scotia and Lunenburg County in particular, and especially children with food insecurity. It's very, very concerning. I think we're in a place right now where housing is seen as an investment with a guaranteed rate of return versus a human right. And there's this assumption that there will somehow be trickle-down housing, right? Like, so every time we build a new condo, someone will move out of a house, and that's going to somehow free it up for somebody else to purchase a really expensive house. And so when you talk about this idea of non-market housing, I think it's probably a term that many of us haven't really heard before, even though we know that there's a need for it. I know that we've had people sit in this room and say, oh, no one could really say what affordable housing is. It's so difficult to define. But I think we do have some really clear definitions and numbers and references that we can use. Yeah. So when you talk about intentionally supporting non-market housing, my question to you is how can we as a municipality attract and then support, but more so attract that non-market housing so that it's an option here in MODL?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's true, our communities may not have a good sense of what non-market housing is or what that looks like. That's something that I think as the province invests more in supporting the development of community-owned housing, that we will see capacity within that sector build, and we will see them come to our local municipalities seeking to develop affordable housing. What that looks like in terms of support from council and attracting them, I think it's offering incentives or supports, waiving those development fees. The donation of municipal lands is an option that other municipalities have explored, and that I know you have as well. Just making it a supportive environment. I think there's an opportunity for the municipality to perhaps explore the development of a housing support, maybe in partnership with other municipalities, creating a housing plan. These may be things that were identified within your Housing Accelerator Fund application. I think it's really having the supports to help navigate the process, especially for community housing providers. They're often just nonprofit groups from your community that want to do something about the need that they're seeing in the community, but they have never owned or operated or developed housing before. Being able to facilitate connections between them and the development sector, funding opportunities would be a huge support to them. That's what we've heard from other non-market providers in our region, that it's a very complicated and cumbersome process, and having someone to help them navigate that process would certainly be helpful and has been helpful to them in the past. And I see Reed has come up. I don't know, Reed may have a better sense of those specific municipal opportunities.
No, I just wanted, I think you probably hit most of those, and you mentioned some in your slides as well, but land, data. One of the things that Nancy brought up there was the lack of data. We have that housing needs assessment report that the province did, but I think there was a presentation from the representative recently about that, and we've looked more locally at that. There's a real challenge in rural communities around accurate data, things like vacancy rates, accurate rental rates, and nonprofit or non-market housing providers need accurate data so they can apply for funding to get grants from places like CMHC. But CMHC themselves and Stats Canada don't collect very good information in our communities. So that's basically flipping it back to these local communities to say, there's a gap of information. What do we do? And so that's one of those areas where we need to fill that gap so that those people can come and understand actually how high those rents really are, and not just be seeing CMHC's data, which we know is really underrepresenting how bad the situation is. So there's data, and I think the really important piece that Nancy mentioned was around partnerships and helping groups locally. I think we're aware that there aren't really many groups operating locally that are in that kind of housing space, and any of the ones that are just brand new to it. And so they need a lot of assistance, connecting with private sector developers, understanding the municipal process, understanding the province in the federal process. So whatever help they can help to help them navigate that. There is some of that work happening already. Like I know that particularly between Tom, the CEO, and Dave in economic development, there's a lot of work already happening in that area and helping people through that process. It's a lot of what they do already. But as Nancy pointed out, there's certainly more opportunities as well.
Yeah, and I would just add that as a coalition, we are beginning to plan an opportunity to bring together the development sector and the nonprofit community to start exploring what does supporting the development of non-market housing look like in our region. So we're just started planning for this event, but we're looking to make that happen. And we've also recently just become a member of the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association, which has a mandate to develop capacity for the community housing sector in Nova Scotia. So we're looking forward to learning more about that. And this fall, we're also going to be participating in a service and community-based homelessness count. So we will be gathering local data about homelessness and the experience of housing insecurity in our community. And to Reed's point, data. Our communities need data and accurate data so that they can determine what affordability looks like when they're applying for funding. It is unfortunate that CMHC does not complete a rental market housing survey in our region. There isn't one done for all of Lunenburg County. Never has been. So that leaves us with an inaccurate picture, really, of what rental rates are in our communities. So it's difficult to get a sense of what that truly looks like. And we know that the data that we do have, it comes from the census, and it's already 4 years old at this point, or 3 years old. And we know that housing prices have continued to rise. We've explored, there is an opportunity to collect more local data by doing a secondary housing market data collection, where you would really approach those folks who maybe have 1 or 2 housing units in the community that they rent out, maybe a house, and doing a survey of them, trying to identify them, but that might mean going door to door and finding out who's renting. Because we don't have a landlord registry or some way of identifying landlords within our rural communities, it's much more difficult to collect that data, whereas, in the city you have large property owners that are collecting data. So it's a bit more difficult. Cape Breton did complete a secondary housing market survey, I want to say 2016, sometime during the 10s, is that the correct term? 2010 sometime, and found that really helpful to get a better sense of what housing looks like in their community, and that may be something SHAC explores in the future to help our communities by gathering that data. Hopefully that's helpful.
Any further questions? Councillor DeLong.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So These considerations that you have on the final slide here, are these something that you're actively working with staff on bringing to modal, or is this something that we would need to provide direction to staff? I guess I'm asking staff then, if they would need direction from council to look at these considerations.
I don't believe so. We are, remember, we attend SHAC.
I used to sit on it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we do attend those meetings, so we do participate in all that. Well, actually, we are also a member of the Nonprofit Housing Association as well, yep. We're one of a few, there's not many municipalities who are members of that, but yeah, we're very much involved in that work. I guess the one thing I would say, though, is that this is not Nancy's full-time job. It's no one's full-time job. So the housing and nonprofit housing and supporting, it kind of falls into very different, it's economic development, it's planning, it's public health, but there's no one dedicated to that. So it is important that that the ball keeps kind of rolling and that there's someone, so SHAC does kind of have that focus, but it isn't an official organization with paid staff or anything like that.
So I guess just for these specific considerations, would we need a future motion at another meeting to look at these, or are these things that you're already considering, given that you attend SHAC meetings and have these on your plate?
I believe these are all being considered now, and of course, as Nancy mentioned, we will be discussing housing as part of 2040 in a more focused way, but we're involved in, planning that event in the fall and other work that SHAC's doing. So I don't believe so at this moment. Yeah.
Any further questions? If not, I want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to getting more information back. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are at, I believe that concludes the agenda with the exception of the mayor's update. The deputy mayor had to leave for an appointment. So some of the things that I was involved in was the Pride flag raising, lots of strawberry suppers and luncheons throughout the communities and breakfasts and activities that are going on this time of year. Opening ceremonies of the Heartland Tour. Promotion and change of command at 143 Construction Engineering Flight. Municipal muscle bake for seniors, and that was very well attended. And again, hats off to staff for another successful event that was held at the Petite Riviere Fire Hall. He spoke at the Municipal Campaign School in Shelburne. Remo meeting, luncheons, 4-H Achievers, Achievement Day in Baker Settlement, and several meetings with residents and the regular municipal meetings. And that concludes my update. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to go in camera, moved by Councillor Wynot, seconded by Councillor Haysom. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously.